Next topic from within the allocation of resources is price elasticity of supply. These are the 11 subtopics within the allocation of resources section. So we will be starting price elasticity of supply. What are the content specifications, the learning outcomes, definition of price elasticity of supply, calculation of price elasticity of supply using the formula and interpreting the significance of the results, and drawing an interpretation of supply curve diagrams to show the different PES with regard to elasticity, and then determinants of PES, the key factors, the key influences on whether the supply is elastic or inelastic, and finally the significance of price elasticity of supply, specifically for decision making of consumers, producers, and government. So let's start first the definition of price elasticity of supply. It can be simply defined as price elasticity of supply is a measure of the responsiveness of quantity supplied to a change in price. It is somewhat similar, but is in opposite direction. So if the price goes up, how would it affect the quantity supplied? Would it go up, and to what extent? Since, as we have discussed earlier, that price is a signal for the producer. If price of a commodity goes up, the firm, the seller, will produce more and more. So if the price goes up, to what extent the quantity supplied would go up? That is what we measure using the price elasticity of supply. Just like in price elasticity of demand, we had a formula to measure elasticity. We have similar formula for price elasticity of supply. You can see percentage in quantity supplied upon percentage change in price. So let us consider these two measures. Price changes from 4 to 6. It results in quantity change from 4 to 6. If the price goes up, the quantity supplied would go up as well. So let us see what is the percentage change in price and percentage change in quantity. So price has gone up by 50% from 4 to 6, and quantity supplied also goes up by 50% from 4 to 6. So it means increase in supply is 50%. Increase in price was also, so it means it will give you the price elasticity of supply equal to 1. This is called a unitary elastic. Let us see some other examples as well. In this specific supply curve, as you can see, the price has moved from 80 to 106, and it has resulted in a little change in supply. So we can well imagine that there is a significant change in price, but the supply is not as responsive. So let's try to calculate its price elasticity. So the change in price 26, original price 80. If you calculate the percentage, 26 upon 80 times 100, so it's indicating an increase in price of 32.5%. And let's see what about quantity. Quantity has gone up by 4 units. Original quantity was 60, so 4 by 60 multiplied by 100, it will give you a percentage of 6.667%. So plugging these numbers in price elasticity formula, quantity supplied has changed by 6.667%, and change in price was 32.5%. If you calculate the result, it's definitely going to be less than 1, and it's going to be 0.205. So price elasticity of supply is 0.205, which is less than 1. So you can say that for this particular commodity, the price elasticity of supply is less than 1, or it is relatively inelastic. So we discussed in the previous lecture that the demand and supply curve, the steeper the curve, the more inelastic is the demand or supply, whatever the case may be. Let's see another example in which we have relatively flatter supply curve. As you can see in this example, that quantity has significantly changed, but there is a little change in price comparatively. So the price has gone up from 80 to 106, 26 upon 80 times 100, that is the same percentage, 32.5%, but look at the change here. The quantity supplied has risen by 40 based upon original multiplied by 100, so it's going to be 66.67%. So if you plug in the formula, these numbers, change in quantity demanded is 66.667% and change in price is 32.5%. So this will give you a number that most certainly be greater than 1. So it is 2.05. 2.05. This is the price elasticity of supply, indicating that it is relatively elastic. So if any change in price is made, it will result in more than proportionate change in supply. Right? So a flatter curve means the price elasticity of supply is greater than 1. A steeper curve, like in the previous example, would mean this one. The price elasticity of supply is less than 1. All right, moving on. So this is summed up right here. We have seen 2 supply curves so far. One was relatively inelastic, one was relatively elastic, and then one was unit elastic like this, where PES was equal to 1. There are 2 other extreme situations also. Perfectly elastic supply curve, in which PES is infinity, and perfectly inelastic, in which PES is equal to 0. Supply cannot change, at least in the short run, no matter whatever the change in price is. And at this price, supply is unlimited. All right, moving on. Then the next topic is the determinant of price elasticity of supply. The first determinant is availability of resources. If there are more resources available, the supply curve would tend to be elastic. We can deploy more resources and we can produce more. Next, technology innovation. If there is technological breakthrough, we can produce more units. So if there is more availability of technology or efficient technology, it would result in higher price elasticity. Right? So price elasticity of supply would be higher. If there are more resources available, price elasticity of supply would be higher. And conversely, if there are less resources or technological degradation, which is very unlikely, in that case, price elasticity of supply would be lower. Then, third, the number of competitors is a factor. If there are more number of competitors in the market, it means that more input can be added, more supply. Supply would be relatively much higher if there are more competitors in the market. And finally, a very important one, flexibility, substitution. Labor can be substituted for capital, machinery, etc. And capital can be substituted for labor. So if there is substitution available, we can employ more labor in place of machine or machines in place of labor. So that would result in more output. So supply could be increased if the factors are substitutable. Next topic, significance of price elasticity of supply for consumers. Yes, it will affect their spending. If it is less elastic, supply can't increase in the short run, so the consumer may have to pay more. It will result in increased spending from customer side. And from the producer side, how does elasticity of supply affect producers? Producers can invest in time-saving technology so as to increase and expand their production, and training of workers to increase productivity, speed of work. So if producers can invest in technology, can train its workforce, then they will be able to produce more output in the short run. So these are the factors that determine the price elasticity of supply. And finally, for government, it can tell the government, this price elasticity of supply, that what would be the incidence of taxes. Previously, we discussed that if the demand curve is inelastic, the incidence would primarily be on the consumer. So in other words, the demand side is from the customer side. So if the demand curve is relatively inelastic, the incidence of tax would be on the consumer, because consumer will have to purchase that essential fuel, food, or maybe some important medicine that is needed for survival. So in that case, if the price elasticity of demand is less than 1 and it is an essential for the consumer, the incidence, the burden of tax will primarily fall on the consumer. Conversely speaking, if the supply curve is relatively inelastic, just like in the example previously we saw, if the price elasticity of supply is less than 1, since supply is from the producer side, and if it is inelastic, then the burden of tax, the incidence of tax, will primarily, not entirely, primarily would be on the producer. So this is how the price elasticity of supply can affect the level of tax incidence. Then Some questions to reinforce your understanding. A product has a price elasticity of supply equal to +2. Okay. A change in price, let us first write the formula. Price elasticity of supply is equal to percentage change in quantity supplied upon percentage change in the price. So price elasticity of supply has been given as 2. A change in price causes the quantity supply to change from 100 to 120. A change of 100 to 120 means an increase of 20%. What would be the change in price? So making change in price as the subject of this equation, we have 20% upon 2, that means 10%. So it means the prices have risen by 10%, so that makes C to be the correct option, and C it is. Next question. Which change would make the supply of a product more price elastic? An increase in the number of substitutes for the product. Increasing the number of substitute products would increase the price elasticity of demand. Incorrect. An increase in the proportion of firms working at full capacity. If the firms are operating at full capacity, they cannot produce more. Since they cannot produce more, so they will be facing an inelastic supply curve, relatively inelastic. They can't increase their production because the firms are operating at full capacity, means they're operating at the maximum installed capacity, can't produce more. D, I deliberately left C, a reduction in the time that the product can be stored. Since the products are perishable and they have to be stored, and the time for which they can be stored has reduced, which means if the storage time has reduced, we can't produce more because it will get rotten. So it will affect your price elasticity of supply. It will make it less inelastic. So what about C then? A reduction in time taken to make the product. Now it takes less time to produce. Since it takes less time to produce, we can produce more. Since we can produce more, so the supply has become relatively price elastic. So that makes C to be the correct option. Next question. The diagram shows the supply curve for a good. What is the price elasticity of supply when the price rises from 2 to 4? So when price goes up from 2 to 4, indicating that the price has increased by 100%. So change in price is 100%, whereas the change in quantity supplied is only 10. 10 as a percentage of 20 is 50%. So price has gone up by 100%. Whereas quantity supplied has gone up by 50%. So you can see there is less proportionate change. So it means it's relatively inelastic. It has to be less than 1. So if you're just going to guess, so it's going to be either A or B. But we don't need to guess. We have the formula. Price elasticity of supply is equal to percentage change in quantity demanded, 50%, divided by percentage change in price. So that gives you nicely the correct number. So it's 0.5. So it's relatively inelastic. That makes B to be the correct option, and B it is. If the price goes up, how would it affect the quantity demanded?